The Auburn Tigers will determine whether or not Ole Miss hosts in the playoffs. Seriously.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today, we're diving into how Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers may have a large impact on Ole Miss's hosting chances. Seriously, Auburn hosts Texas A&M in a tricky matchup in a couple of weeks, especially with A&M's Texas rivalry game just a week away. And for Ole Miss to host a playoff game in December, Ole Miss needs either Texas or Alabama to stumble in these final 3 weeks. And Auburn could be the key to making that happen for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. And, oh yeah, Ole Miss just flipped Caleb Cunningham from Alabama this week. So there's that. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and YouTube. Thank you very much for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers that make the show what it is. Don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy. They offer great perspectives on the SEC and college football and even Ole Miss. Check out Locked On Auburn with Zach Blackerby as well. Check them out. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's pretty good stuff indeed. Now, the playoff rankings have come out. Ole Miss is firmly in it. If Ole Miss wins out, they're in the playoffs. And winning out is the most important thing to get into the playoffs. But there are steps and there are levels to where Ole Miss can achieve this season. And hosting is not outside the realm of possibility, coming in at number 11 with Georgia taking on Tennessee. Indiana still yet to face Ohio State. Miami is basically a heart attack waiting to happen. All of that could see Ole Miss easily move into that number 8 position, but Ole Miss might need a little bit of help. And the Kentucky loss earlier in the season has ensured that Ole Miss would need help, but there's going to be a little bit of help potentially in a very familiar face and a very unlikely place. And that is the Auburn Tigers. Auburn basically controls Ole Miss's hosting fate in their hands as we speak right now. And it starts off in 2 weeks. They play ULM, and Ole Miss fans can really they can do all the schadenfreude they want to and root for Auburn to lose against the ULM Warhawks, just like they did against New Mexico State. But after that, Auburn and Ole Miss fans, they probably need to lock arms and be together. And what I mean by that is the next week, Auburn hosts Texas A&M. If Auburn beats ULM and gets a little bit of the feel good, you have Texas A&M coming in. Jordan-Hare is a tricky place to play, and Texas A&M has had trouble stopping the run. Rocket Sanders ran all over them in Williams-Brice Stadium. I think Jarquez Hunter can do a little bit of that. If Auburn can take care of the football and their defense shows up and you have a low-scoring game, there's no reason to think that Auburn cannot win that game, especially when you consider that Texas A&M the week after that has the long anticipated, the game that has been circled on their calendar like Ole Miss did Georgia. Texas A&M has done that with Texas. Since they haven't played in nearly 10 years, the game is in Kyle Field. It's going to be a massive game, like $2,000 per ticket type game. It's going to be a massive thing. It's a perfect trap atmosphere for the Auburn Tigers. And the reason I bring that up and the reason Auburn's important there is Texas A&M needs to beat Texas for Ole Miss. Either Texas or Alabama has to take an L. And Texas A&M has to beat Texas, so they need to get the L from Auburn ahead of time. Go ahead and eliminate Texas A&M from the hosting possibility and all of that, and then put the same emotion into the Texas game as before, to where Texas A&M is trying to outside shot the playoffs as well. So I think that Auburn can sneak up on Texas A&M. Listen, Auburn has looked good at times. Their average per play is good offensively and is good defensively. It's turnovers, it's efficiency, it is weird mistakes that have happened at completely inopportune times that has held Auburn back, and that is why they're the number 14 team in the SEC this year. It's just that. they've run into some buzzsaws. They've run into some overconfidence. They thought they have arrived and turned it around when they haven't quite done that yet. It's a Charleston type situation where you take one step forward and two steps back, and Auburn just can't quite seem to get over the hump. Ole Miss fans and Ole Miss needs Auburn to get over the hump. They need Auburn to honestly figure out Louisiana Monroe and get some stuff figured out there. Run the ball effectively. I don't care if you put Walker White in and use a young quarterback to run the ball effectively to get ready for Texas A&M the following week. You handle that. You beat Texas A&M, and then you have that free shot at Alabama. And even last year, Auburn, is not good as they were, was a play away from beating Auburn the year before. And Hugh Freeze has won a game in Tuscaloosa. So anybody that wants to talk about how hard it will be for Auburn to win a game in Tuscaloosa, remember, Hugh Freeze has won a game there, and this Alabama team lost to Vandy and almost South Carolina. They did actually lose to Tennessee as well. This is not the invincible Alabama teams of 2014, 2015. It's not those teams. And it's hilarious that I mentioned those years because those are the years that Hugh Freeze beat Alabama. But that is a major key, because if you can take Alabama out, if Alabama takes one more loss, playoff gone, adios. Ole Miss becomes the number 2 team in the Southeastern Conference, and they're probably going to move up into that hosting realm as possible, because this is the way I think that the playoff committee wants to do it. You've got the conference champions that are going to get buys, so they're out of it. Whoever wins the SEC and whoever wins the Big Ten, they're sitting there waiting on the New Year's Day bowl games and the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. Then in the hosting and just playoff, you're going to have to basically divide up 3 at-large bids. So one SEC team is probably going to host, if you just look at the rankings as they sit right now, and 2 more SEC teams are likely going to get in. The Big Ten is going to have 2 teams host and 1 team just get in, whether it be Ohio State or Indiana or whatever's going on there. I think that's the way they're going to format it. So Ole Miss needs either Texas to get out of the way or Alabama to get out of the way, and nothing funky to happen in the SEC championship game. If for some reason weirdness happened, it could be just a championship game for somebody, but whoever wins that needs to be either Alabama or Texas, essentially. It needs to be one of the 2 teams that is ahead of Ole Miss currently. Auburn has the ability to help all of that out. They can clear off Alabama by beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa. They can clear off Texas A&M by beating Texas A&M and Jordan-Hare. And Texas A&M in that Texas game, I'm telling you, the Longhorns are walking into a buzzsaw, really similarly to what Ole Miss did against Georgia. Texas is walking into that in Kyle Field the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Those are the things that matters. I think 4 SEC teams are going to make the playoffs. And you have the 2 that I think are in the best shape is Alabama and Ole Miss. Those are the 2 teams right now that are in the best shape to get there. If Texas or Tennessee loses one more game, I think they're pretty much out. Georgia, in that case, controls their own fate. And then it gets weird. It gets really weird. If Texas A&M beats Texas A&M is probably going to get that 4th spot. If Texas loses to A&M and Auburn beats A&M, that provides an opening for Tennessee to sneak back in the back door. I think if Texas loses, even though they're number 3 in the country right now, loses one time, they're going to be out of the playoffs. It doesn't make much sense at all. And that's the reason I think that Auburn has a chance to help Ole Miss out just greatly. If Auburn can beat Texas A&M or Alabama, Ole Miss is in a really good spot to host in the playoff. As long as Ole Miss wins their game against Florida and against Mississippi State, a game that they should be over a touchdown favorite in both. Ole Miss has to win those games. But if that happens and Auburn can just pull off one upset, just one, just do us a solid one time, Hugh Freeze. If you can do that, Ole Miss is going to host. And that will be the biggest football game in the state of Mississippi. Remember, Hugh, you're from Coldwater or Independence, Mississippi. You're familiar with that. They've already had the biggest game in the state of Mississippi history with the Georgia football game. That playoff game would trump that almost instantly. It is really interesting to see what's going to happen. I'm pretty fired up, and Ole Miss fans need to root for Auburn. We've talked about the Georgia Bulldogs, the Arkansas Razorbacks, and the South Carolina Gamecocks. We did that yesterday. This is the team that you're probably not thinking of that has a large impact on what could happen in the future. Now, if Ole Miss has to go to Penn State or Ole Miss has to go to Bloomington, Indiana, or South Bend, Indiana, anything like that, this team is playing pretty well on the road. Even Tiger Stadium, as crazy as it was, they didn't play particularly well, but it wasn't a noise thing that got them. South Carolina, they completely took them apart. Arkansas, they completely took them apart. So it's not like I'm worried about going on the road. I would just like the state of Mississippi to have that moment in that biggest football game in their state's history. That's all I mean about that. Up next, we're stepping outside the SEC footprint. From Ohio State's clash with Indiana to Miami's surprising spot in the rankings, and whether or not the Big 12 may be a one-bid league this year, we'll break down all of that, and including the soft schedules that might shake things up. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if you win that bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place those live bets on the NFL all in one place. This week is going to be a fun week to sports bet with potential Georgia revenge tour games on the horizon and Texas going to Arkansas. It should be fun. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So let's go outside the footprint just a little bit and look at some of the rankings that are going on. And I'm not going to put them up or anything like that, but something that is interesting to me is to this point, it feels like the committee is just justifying wins over losses. As long as you're 11-0, that it trumps everything else. And they're just looking at that loss column to where all the ones lining up, all the twos are lining up. And I think that might lead to a little bit of something weird happening in a couple of weeks. Now, Ohio State has the loss to Oregon. It's the best win of the season. Oregon and Ohio State, they absolutely deserve to be right where they are at #1 and #2. That is just the way it works. #3 is Texas. Texas has beaten nobody. You know, we like to talk about the SEC and how hard it is and all of that stuff. Texas has beaten nobody. Their best win is what? Against Florida, against Michigan, maybe? They have not played anybody. They've beaten a series of a down Oklahoma team, a down Florida team, a down Mississippi State team. They have basically scraped and dredged the bottom of the SEC this year, so they have no wins. That's the reason I say that if Texas A&M gets Texas, Texas might fall all the way out of the playoffs, even at 10-2, because everybody they played that had a number next to their name took them down. And Texas A&M really takes them down, that will be interesting. But the same problem exists with Penn State. Penn State's best win is over Illinois, maybe? Again, a team that is not ranked in the top 25. It's just the way that it's worked out. There's no Michigan even propping them up at that point. But their loss to Ohio State, it was relatively close. And that close loss, I guess, is what is keeping them as high as they are. Indiana has played absolutely nobody. They have Ohio State in a couple of weeks, but they played nobody. There's a chance that they're going to be 11-1 at the end of the year and not have a victory over a single team that are receiving a vote in the AP poll, much less the college football playoff poll. I have no idea what was going to happen to Indiana if Ohio State boat races them. I asked that question on X earlier. It's like, what are we going to do with Indiana? because there's a chance that they're 11-1, and 11-1 is supposed to mean something, and it should mean something. But if the only decent team, the only playoff level team that you play, you get beat by, how are we supposed to take that? I was watching Paul Feinbaum the other day, and there's like South Carolina would win the Big Ten this year. They were talking about how the games in the SEC are so much above the games in the Big Ten. And a lot of that has to do with the Big Ten having to play 19. There's 19 teams. So everybody's schedule is just weird. Nothing makes sense. Then you have Notre Dame, who's sitting at number 8, and they have a win over Texas A&M. And it's like, well, that's great. But they only have one loss, right? But that loss is to Northern Illinois, a G5 team. And that's a worse loss than Ole Miss losing to Kentucky this year. And Northern Illinois isn't exactly setting G5 Grant Land on fire right now either. But they just have that one in the L column as opposed to 2 losses. Ole Miss lost a game in overtime to LSU on the last play of the game, and that Kentucky loss happened. Are the culmination of those 2 losses worse than losing to Northern Illinois at home? I would say no. I don't think Ole Miss should be punished at all for LSU and losing that game in overtime. LSU's ranked in the top 25 of the college football playoff poll. They're likely going to stay there. Northern Illinois, they wouldn't be in the college football playoff top 75. So I don't think Notre Dame needs to be 8. Notre Dame should be at a point where they're traveling to that first round game. And there's still time for that to happen. Miami dropped from like 7 or 8 to 9 after losing to Georgia Tech. It was a close game, but they lost the game. It is just because they look at the number on that L column and they try and line them up. If you have no losses, we're going to put all of them together and we're going to rank them. If they have 1 loss, we're going to put all of them together and rank them. But there's no reason to think that Georgia would lose to Notre Dame. There's not. There's no reason to think that Georgia would lose to Miami or BYU. There's a little bit of politics at play in this college football playoff in these early rankings. And we need to put the caveat in here that these early rankings, they need to be used as a guide more than anything else, because when the rankings actually matter, I think Georgia would be in right now. I think that Miami would slide back a little bit and they would get in because of the automatic berth. BYU would be weird, but it's a situation to where Notre Dame probably should not be higher than 11. I think Notre Dame probably deserves to be in the college football playoff rankings right now and in the bracket, but they need to be just above the G5 team because their loss is absolutely terrible. Their best win is on the road at Texas A&M, and that's a good win, especially after Texas A&M beats Texas potentially in a couple of weeks. But if Texas A&M drops that Auburn game that we were talking about, that would help Ole Miss on multiple fronts by making Notre Dame look a little bit worse. It would take Texas A&M out of the equation. And if they beat Texas, they would take Texas out of the equation. That is the reason that Auburn game is so important. The Auburn-Texas A&M game is absolutely massive. It is the biggest game that I can think of for Ole Miss that weekend. Now, Ole Miss has to take care of Florida. They absolutely have to take care of Florida. They absolutely have to take care of Mississippi State. You can't overlook a single one of them. And I don't think that Ole Miss will. I think that Ole Miss is mature enough to where they're not going to overlook those games looking at what's going to happen in the playoffs. As a fan base, we can absolutely plan and talk and scenarios and all of that stuff. It's fantastic. But I think that Ole Miss is mature enough that they can handle what's going on because they can remember what happened to the Kentucky Wildcats just a little bit before. And I don't think that Kentucky or LSU was just, hey, Ole Miss was overlooking those teams. I do blame spring practice and the fear of depth charts and all of that for not having the team ready to play for the early part of the season. This is a different team now. This is a different team. This is a buzzsaw. This team reminds me so much of 2008. It's scary. So we'll see whenever Ole Miss goes down to Gainesville. We will see whenever Ole Miss takes on Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl in front of brand new goalpost. But this out of footprint stuff, I do think they're playing a little bit of ratings and politics as it sits right now, and they should probably just be used as a guide. I think whenever the final rankings get done, Ole Miss is probably 8 or 9, depending on what Auburn does. That is my opinion there, and we'll see exactly how it goes. Anyway, big recruiting news for Ole Miss. Caleb Cunningham flipped his commitment from Alabama, joining Lane Kiffin's impressive 2025 lineup. And also with Austin Simmons and Shakai Mills-Knight and Aiden Williams and Caden Lee joining Caleb Cunningham, potentially if they can flip AKD or maybe Deuce Knight or Winston Watkins comes in the fold, this offensive class has a chance to be pretty special. So stick around for that. Game Time is your place to get Ole Miss tickets. With killer last-minute deals, views from receipts, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. There's not a bad seat in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium or the Pavilion, if we're going to be honest, but they have the views from every seat before you buy the tickets. That's an awesome feature. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection. They take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might be able to help you out with tickets as well. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Pretty awesome stuff. Caleb Cunningham flipped his commitment from Alabama to Ole Miss. It's a flip in the sip. Caleb Cunningham does that, and that's pretty awesome. That's from his Dandy Dozen photo. I think that's Andrew Maddox sitting right next to him. I think he's sitting right next to a Kylan Deere, who basically the staff is really working to try and make some headway at the moment going into signing day. And obviously, I think it was Ryan Young, who is a handler in the state of Mississippi and is on the 24/7 site, put in a crystal ball for Deuce Knight to flip to Ole Miss as well. I don't know exactly what that means, but that crystal ball is in there, and we should at least pay attention to it. Caleb Cunningham's a really good football player, folks. Caleb Cunningham is the number 17 player in the entire country, number 2 wide receiver in the entire country, and the top player in the state of Mississippi. This will make the 3rd year in a row that Ole Miss has landed the top player in the state of Mississippi, and he is a day one starter likely at Ole Miss. He is a direct 1-for-1 replacement for Trey Harris. Now, he's a young guy, and with a young guy, there's going to be mistakes made and stuff like that. But the talent with Caleb Cunningham is undeniable as somebody that can completely take apart defenses. If you want to see what a freshman receiver can do at the college level, look at Jeremiah Smith up at Iowa State. Look at Ryan Williams, who, by the way, do you know he's only 17 years old at Alabama? Caleb Cunningham is looking to come in to have that similar type of impact at Ole Miss. And if you want to look at Ole Miss's team going into 2025, you got Austin Simmons sitting at quarterback. At backup, you're going to have A.J. Maddox. Deuce Knight, if Ole Miss can make headway and that Ryan Young crystal ball is true, that's a pretty impressive young 3 deep. At running back, you have Shakai Mills-Knight. There could be some more added to the fold as well, so we don't know. Logan Diggs should be back as the big elder statesman of that room that'll help out what's going on. At wide receiver, you have Nareel White, you have Caden Lee, you have Aiden Williams, you have Caleb Cunningham, you have Dylan Alfred, you have potentially Winston Watkins if Ole Miss can close the deal. You can see where, like I said, this unit is going to be young, but unbelievably talented. Just super talented on the field. And everybody can see what it's going to look like with Austin Simmons, who had a series against the Georgia Bulldogs defense where he not just looked like he belonged, he looked kind of special. Listen, I said this on the live stream earlier yesterday. Austin Simmons series reminded me of the Music City Bowl in 2000. when Eli Manning's debut, when West Virginia was up, was it 42-13 or something like that, and Eli Manning came into the game, and all of a sudden they're throwing the ball all around going down the field. That is what Austin Simmons reminded me of. Now, Austin Simmons probably made him some NIL money in between. Ole Miss, I'm sure, is going to take care of him because that is a special dude. And I do think that if we're going to be real about it, Austin Simmons' baseball career at Ole Miss should probably be over. Now, I do have it on fairly good authority that there is some wiggle room there. When you have a situation, Austin Simmons is likely going to graduate in a couple of months from Ole Miss. And whenever that happens, he's draft eligible. And if he's draft eligible, you can just go into the draft and do whatever, and you can continue your quarterbacking career, and you have baseball pitching sitting there as well. I think that is an option for Austin Simmons graduating from college. So I think he's going to be the dude and have a full spring, and he's going to be set up. You're going to have Deuce Knight potentially. If you can work that flip, maybe you're going to have A.J. Maddox, who is set up to be the backup quarterback, and maybe Walker Howard. I'm not going to discount that he is going to be around in 2025 and beyond, just because it makes sense that Walker Howard would transfer to somebody like Louisiana Lafayette, where he's from, to be the starting quarterback. But I don't know. I don't get the vibe off of Walker Howard that he's unhappy and looking to run. Even though he clearly lost the backup quarterbacking job, I don't think anybody has heard one single negative thing about Walker Howard this whole year. And honestly, that's kind of impressive to see what's going to happen. So it might be a situation where Simmons is the quarterback next year, and you have Howard and Maddox, and then potentially Deuce Knight as well on top of that. And again, Ole Miss is recruiting A.K. Deer. They're recruiting Winston Watkins. There's a lot of big-time players that Ole Miss is trying to close in before signing day, which is, heck, about 3 weeks away at this point. The signing day is going to be about December 6th or something like that this year. So we'll see exactly how it goes. And it does look like Caleb Cunningham is going to sign in the fall. So that's pretty cool. Everything going on. Again, Ole Miss fans, root for Auburn. You're our Auburn fans. If you want to do Schadenfreude, do it against ULM, because against Texas A&M and against Alabama, they need to kind of get right. And honestly, Auburn needs to probably get right against ULM to get right against A&M and Alabama. So we'll see exactly how it goes. So thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for being patient with me during this bye week as I kind of meandered around, and I'm playing the playoff game a little bit as well. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches covering the best conference in college football. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And also exciting news, you can become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider. It is the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. It is our texting program that sends you notifications on everything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial and experience the future of college sports coverage. We constantly are adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description. And for those of you watching on YouTube, we'll send you to Locked On College Sports right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.